I think you've set a new bar today for being contentious with the press corps, kind of calling us losers to our faces and all that.
No, not all of you, just many of you.
All right, fine. Enough of us. Is this what?
Not you, David.
Is this what it's going to be like covering you if you're president?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is going to be like this, David. Half of you are amazed that I raised all of this money. If the press writes false stories like they did, where I wanted to keep a low profile, I didn't want the credit for raising all this money for the vets. I wasn't looking for the credit. And by the way, more money is coming in. But I had no choice but to do this because the press was saying I didn't raise any money for them. I think it's a disgrace that information that was false and fake and never happened got released to the public. As far as BuzzFeed, which is a failing pile of garbage, writing it, I think they're going to suffer the consequences. They already are. And as far as CNN going out of their way to build it up, it was just reported that it wasn't this Michael Cohen they were talking about. So all night long, it's Michael Cohen. I said, I want to see your passport. He brings his passport to my office. I say, hey, wait a minute. He didn't leave the country. He wasn't out of the country. They had Michael Cohen of the Trump Organization was in Prague. It turned out to be a different Michael Cohen. It's a disgrace what took place. It's a disgrace. And I think they ought to apologize to start with.
41% decline in illegal southern border crossings. 100% vote by UN Security Council to sanction North Korea. 97,482 illegal immigrant arrests. 70% convicted of additional crimes. 52,169 expelled. Adopted a resolute policy on Afghanistan. Advocated for practical territory education. Advocated for skills-based immigration policies. American companies now expanding rather than shipping jobs overseas. Announced sanctions targeting Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Appointed a transportation secretary who is modernizing air traffic control. Appointed an education secretary who is correcting abuse of Title IX. Appointed an EPA administrator who has rescinded over 30 regulations. Appointed an FDA director who is facilitating generic drug competition. Appointed an interior secretary to improve forest management and expand users of public lands. Approved the Keystone Pipeline. Called for international support of Iranian protesters. Canceled school lunch program that failed to force children to eat unpopular foods. Constructed test models of the border fence. Convinced Japan and South Korea to increase defense spending. Convinced NATO members to honor minimum financial commitments. Decertified Iranian nuclear treaty and sent it to Senate as constitutionally required. Designated North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. Eliminated prohibition on interstate health insurance sales. Ended abuses of student loan forgiveness program. Ended forced provision of contraceptive by Catholic nunneries. Ended requirement for state funding of Planned Parenthood. Ended research into Y2K preparedness. Ended rule requiring employers to report pay data by gender and race. Expanded school choice efforts. FCC has begun to dismantle unnecessary internet neutrality regulations. Foreign firms building plants and creating jobs in the U.S. Improved rules of engagement for military and combat situations. Initiated resistance, sue and settle tactics against EPA. Initiated sanctions on Venezuelan dictatorship. Introduced regulatory budgeting requiring agencies to rescind 2 rules to issue a new one. ISIS bombing ramped up from about 20 to 500 or more airstrikes per week. ISIS ground campaign intensified. Raqqa captured. Its fighters surrendering in large numbers. Issued a national security strategy. Kate's Law passed House, now pending in Senate. Leveraged U.S. contribution to UN to force 5% budget cut and reduce staffs. NLRB reversed rule making indirect employee control sufficient to be joint employees. Nominated 60 judges, 21 confirmed, none yet denied. Nominated a new federal chief. Nominated 1 Supreme Court judge who was confirmed. Obtained release of Aya Hiazi after 3 years in Egyptian prison. Obtained release of Caitlin Coleman and husband from Haqqani. Obtained release of UCLA basketball players from China. raised awareness of opioid addiction crisis, recognized Jerusalem as Israeli capital and announced plan to move U.S. embassy there, reduced excess size of 2 national parks in Utah, reduced permanent staff in all cabinet agencies except for the Veterans Administration, the HS, and Interior, reduced White House staff by 110, repeal of ACA mandate including the tax change bill, requested increased funding for missile defense in face of North Korean and Iranian threats, rescinded temporarily the Jones Act facilitating speedier emergency shipments to Puerto Rico, rescinded 2015 Waters of the United States rule, rescinded ban drilling in the Arctic and coastal areas, rescinded coal mining ban on public lands, rescinded criminalization of accidental killing of migratory birds, rescinded Cuban cash giveaway, rescinded the Clean Power Plan, rescinded the war on coal, rescinded threat to pull funds from schools that prohibit transgenders from picking their bathrooms, rescinded Title IX guidance letter on sexual harassment, restored policy barring federal funding of abortion overseas, restoring military capability in the face of personal shortages and equipment failures, revamped U.S. space program, assigning ambitious new objectives, reversed rules for screening potential terrorist tourists, sanctioned Venezuela for human rights violations, sanctuary cities legislation passed House pending in Senate, signed 74 legislative bills, 13 reversing executive orders and 23 joint resolutions into law, signed comprehensive tax change bill containing most of the changes he proposed, signed legislation opening Arctic Natural Wildlife Reservation to oil drilling, signed legislation to expedite firing of incompetent Veteran Administration officials. Supreme Court largely upheld ban on selected travelers, taking steps to control the Rogue Consumer Finance Protection Agency, targeted MS-13 gang members for priority deportation. The president's lawyers announced a framework for restoring the separation of powers.